Not a single member of my immediate family would be alive today if not for modern medicine. Not me, not my wife, not my kids. The medical establishment has certainly made some terrible errors. Thalidomide and OxyContin come to mind. But it has done far, far more good than harm in this world. I am tremendously grateful for the blessings that have come to me and to all of us by way of doctors and scientists. These days, however, my gratitude for the miracles of modern medicine is tempered by my anger at those who spurn those blessings, those who refuse to get vaccinated against COVID, instead preferring horse dewormers or blueberry antioxidant shakes. I'm furious at the feeble-minded fools who seem content to drag us into a third year of this nightmare. I'm absolutely apoplectic when I hear people I love, let alone people I don't, spout nonsense rather than do something that would help them keep themselves and all of us safe. And as I often do when I feel myself being overtaken by fury, I return to the Torah. Specifically, I come back to a Talmudic teaching about an obscure verse which refers to the wars of the Lord which take place Waheb Basupah. Now, don't worry if you don't know what Waheb Basupah means. Neither does anybody else, no matter how strong their Hebrew is. It's an incomprehensible phrase, though that doesn't really pose an obstacle for the rabbis of the Talmud. They teach that Waheb Basupah really means Ahava Basofo, love at the end. A war of the Lord, a holy war in Jewish thought, is one in which there is love at the end. Rabbi Chia Bar Abba says, even a parent and a child, or a rabbi and a student who are passionately learning Torah together can become enemies with each other. But they do not conclude their studies until they love each other. They do not get up until there is love at the end. Now, a traditional Beit Midrash or yeshiva is not an environment of peace and harmony. It's a place of disagreement and friction. The entire Talmudic tradition is an anthology of tension. Rabbi X says this, Rabbi Y says that. There's no attempt to gloss over the differences or pretend we're all saying the real thing. Yet in the Talmud, that massive compilation of disagreement that creates Judaism as we know it, there's no record of Rabbi X protesting outside of the home of Rabbi Y, no record of Rabbi Y physically attacking Rabbi X. How does an argument become something in which there's love at the end? A few weeks ago, at our Friday afternoon Torah study, I was learning together with Julie Meslin, who is often here with her daughters, Wilhelmina and Olette. Julie has a beautiful, gentle soul, and she shared an insight into this very question that has stuck with me. I'm paraphrasing, but in essence, she said, it all comes down to compassionate curiosity. You have to keep asking yourself, why might my opponent feel this way, until you come to an answer for which you can have compassion. We were having this conversation, Julie and I, just a few days after Georgia had passed a, quote, election security law, which the New York Times called a breathtaking assertion of partisan politics in elections. A number of us there that night were angry and pained by the wickedness of the Republican legislators who seemed quite intent on gutting American democracy in pursuit of their own power. Why might they do that? Julie asked. Because they're racists? Somebody answered. Is that an answer you can have compassion for? She asked. If not, keep going. And so we kept going. They're racists. They're power hungry. They're insecure. And after every answer, Julie asked, is that an answer you can have compassion for? If not, keep going. Finally, somebody said they're afraid. They wrongfully think that black people are a threat to them, and they think they need to do this to keep their families safe. Julie asked again, but with a caveat this time. I'm not asking if you agree with them or if you endorse their position, but can you have compassion for somebody wanting to keep their family safe, even if the way they do it is completely wrong and even evil? To my surprise, I found I could. The compassion that Julie was teaching doesn't mean agreeing with the position the person holds. It means finding compassion for the person who holds that position. So back to my frustration and anger at those who refuse to get vaccinated against COVID. How can I have compassion for, how can I be curious about people who are so obviously wrong and are foolishly extending this pandemic nightmare? I'm reading an incredible history of genetics by Siddhartha Mukherjee, and in it, he quotes from the nearly unanimous 1927 Supreme Court decision authorizing medical authorities to forcibly sterilize the feeble-minded, a category which at the time included depressives, feminists, dyslexics, and rebellious adolescents. In the decision, the court wrote, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is more than broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes." Let me repeat that last line from this near unanimous Supreme Court decision. The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is more than broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. I really want everyone to get vaccinated, but the government's authority to compel vaccination was used as the basis for forced involuntary sterilization? That doesn't sound so good. And knowing that the American eugenics movement, which was behind that decision, helped fuel Nazi Germany's efforts at their ethnic cleansing, that makes it sound a lot worse. I want to be very clear because there is a subtle but essential point here. This is not a sermon about vaccines. This is a sermon about how we understand those with whom we disagree. I and everyone in my family who is old enough has gotten the vaccine, and for that I am profoundly glad and grateful. More than that, I absolutely and unambivalently support the efforts of institutions of all sizes, from BHA to the Beacon City School District to the federal government, to mandate vaccines. And those opposing vaccines and masks, those who have caused so much suffering with their foolishness, might be less deserving of my hatred and scorn than I might have thought. Learning about that Supreme Court decision didn't change my position, but it did change my sense of judgment. You might be wrong, but that doesn't mean you're crazy. You might be foolish, even willfully so, but that doesn't mean you're evil. I have to disagree with you, and perhaps even draw clear boundaries to protect myself from you, but that doesn't mean I have to hate you. The trick, as Julie taught us that night, is remaining connected to a point of compassionate curiosity. Part of why it's so hard to have compassion for people with whom we disagree is because we have positions that are incommensurate. This one thinks that two consenting adults should be able to marry each other regardless of sex or gender, and this one thinks that only a man and a woman should be able to marry. And indeed, sometimes there are real substantive conflicts between values. As the philosopher Isaiah Berlin famously put it, total liberty for the wolves is death for the lambs. And so sometimes we are doomed to choose between foundational values. Sometimes we are doomed to choose, but not always. A few years ago, during a swelteringly hot August, my son, who was 7 or 8 at the time, and I were visiting a friend of mine in Western Massachusetts. My friend and I sat on the pier discussing the joys and challenges of middle-aged life, and our boys were splashing around in the water. They had been playing wonderfully together all weekend, but now they were squabbling on the shores of the lake. This one wants to get out of the water and play baseball. This one wants to stay in the water and keep splashing around. They were fighting because their positions were incompatible. They obviously can't simultaneously be in the water and out of the water, and so we had a crisis. We had conflict. At the time, On the recommendation of my friend and BHA board member Karen Mayer, I've been reading a book called Getting to Yes, in which the authors Robert Fisher and William Ury highlight the difference between interests and positions. Positions are what we've decided upon. In the case of the boys, one's position was to get out of the water, and the other's position was that they should stay in the water. Interests, however, are what cause us to decide on this position or that. Neither boy was articulating their interest. Neither boy was saying what motivated them to want to stay in the water or get out of the water. So I asked them. One wanted to stay in the water because it was really hot out there and it was cooler in the water. The other wanted to get out of the water because he was really bored of just splashing around on the shores of the lake. So I asked, what if we played some football in the water? The hot one stays in the water, the bored one gets a game. Cheers all around. My friend went back to the house to get a football while I sat and awaited the call from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. These boys had irreconcilable positions, but not irreconcilable interests. Now, these boys were 7 or 8 years old. It's not surprising or inappropriate that they couldn't come to a place of compassionate curiosity about their friends' interests. But what about us? Why is it so easy for us to despise our opponents? Sometimes our opponents are not merely deplorable, but really despicable people. What sort of compassionate curiosity am I supposed to have for people who hate me, who want to kill me or you or our children? I aspire to have compassionate curiosity about people with whom I'm in conflict. It is not, to put it mildly, my natural inclination. Thank God, though, there are people out there from whom I can learn. Matthew Stevenson was a Jewish student at New College in Sarasota, Florida. On Fridays, Stevenson would regularly have people over for Shabbos dinner. He'd light candles and make kiddush, but very few of the people there were Jewish. There just weren't that many Jewish students at New College. They were Christian, they were atheists, they were Hindu. Anybody open-minded enough to listen to a few blessings in Hebrew and have dinner. In the fall of 2011, Stevenson invited Derek Black, another kid from his dorm, to join them. This was notable because Black was one of the leading lights of the white nationalist movement. His father, Don Black, had created Stormfront, the internet's first and largest white nationalist site, and his godfather, David Duke, you might have heard of him, is a former Grand Wizard of the KKK and one of the country's most notorious racists. Although he was still just a college student, Derek was a white nationalist leader in his own right. He had started the Stormfront Youth webpage, and he hosted a daily AM radio show which gave him a chance to tell his listeners that, quote, massive non-white immigration was leading to a white genocide in our own country. Now, Derek Black, the college student, tried to keep his white nationalism quiet while he was at college, but his identity was revealed and the campus was in an uproar. He moved off campus and was essentially ostracized, isolated from all the other students. And that's when Stevenson invited him to Shabbos dinner. Maybe he just hasn't spent that much time with Jewish people before, Stevenson said at the time. Black came to Shabbos dinner, and then came again the next week, and came again the next week, and a conversation emerged. A conversation between a Jewish student and a white nationalist. Just a few years later, in 2013, Derek wrote a statement to the Southern Poverty Law Center, publicly renouncing his former views. He is now a committed anti-racist activist, currently pursuing a PhD in history at the University of Chicago, focused on the intellectual history of the idea of race. Matt Stevenson was faced with an opponent who was worthy of hatred, an adversary who wanted him dead. Confronted with someone dedicating to erasing his humanity, erasing his existence, Stevenson incredibly remained committed to and connected to the humanity of Derek Black. I'm inspired by Matthew Stevenson, even as I'm ashamed to admit how much I struggle to remain connected to the humanity of those with whom I disagree on matters far more trivial than white nationalism. It's some small comfort to know I'm not the only one in this community or in our lineage who struggles with that very issue. The rabbis of the Talmud tell the tale of wicked King Manasseh, who lived a cruel life. He conscripted thousands of slaves to build temples to idolatry, and when the temples were built, he slaughtered the slaves to offer them as sacrifices to the evil spirits. On his deathbed, however, he made a full and sincere confession. The angels of heaven, however, knew that if the Holy One of Blessing heard Manasseh's confession, he would be forgiven. And the angels were outraged at this injustice. So they locked the gates of heaven to block Manasseh's confession from coming in. The Holy One of Blessing pushed his throne aside and dug a tunnel under his own throne so that he could hear Manasseh's words. The angels were furious at God. And so the Holy One turned to the angels and said, "Look, it's my business to forgive. This is who I am. This is what I do. If I don't forgive, humans would never be able to confess." The Quaker tradition calls moments like this listening words into speech, creating a space in which words can emerge. The Holy One knew the necessity of divine softness, compassionate curiosity, even about one as wicked as Manasseh. Without it, the words and the connections that they build simply would not flow. The Holy One showed compassion for Manasseh, drew his words out, which was the only way. Manasseh was not going to be bullied into confession. Matthew Stevenson showed compassion for Derek Black and turned his heart more fully than force ever could. When we come to conflict with force, our only options are kill or be killed. When we come with compassionate curiosity, we can transform friction into connection. We will stand right here at Kol Nidre, asking for atonement and release from all of the ways we have fallen short, all of the ways in which we have been feeble-minded, obstinate, deplorable, or just plain mean. We ask that the Holy One of Blessing have compassionate curiosity about us and show mercy to us, just as mercy was shown even to evil King Manasseh, even to Derek Black. In this coming year, may others, human and divine, have compassionate curiosity about us, and may we, in turn, have compassionate curiosity about those whom we encounter. Gemar Chatima Tova. May this be a year of blessing for all of us.